And we're live.
Okay. It doesn't show up on my end yet, but okay. All right. Hello, everybody. um, Welcome to 11 Hours Apart, a
Mm.
ChiLynn podcast. His name is Chi, and I'm Leah. We're your hosts um, here where we talk about different movies, TV shows, and other forms of culture and art that we're interested in. This week we wanted to talk about the first two episodes, I believe, of the new Game of Thrones show called The House of the Dragon or House of Dragon. And I have seen a little bit more episodes than she has, but she has only seen the first two episodes. So this will only contain spoilers for those first two episodes of the new House of the Dragon Game of Thrones show on HBO. But we'd like to welcome all of our audience here. Please like, share, and subscribe. And please leave comments as we proceed through our conversation. We like to hear any sort of feedback you might have, or questions, or comments about like some of the stuff we're saying. So, yeah, let's get into it. Without further ado, Chi, I am curious because you just watched these first two episodes this week. What were your initial impressions? I feel like you're barely into it, but you're actually two whole episodes into it, so it's like pretty good. There is a decent amount of stuff that happens those first two
Hmm.
episodes. So
Yeah, I really enjoyed them. I think the first two episodes got me hooked completely.
good. Yeah,
Yeah, so
I
so
agree.
there's I think I think this show, this show was supposed to be like a prequel. It's like 100 something years before Daenerys Targaryen was born. So I think the show sort of kept a lot of the vibe of the earlier Game of Thrones seasons, like the political intrigue, that sort of thing. And yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I heard a lot of good things about the show, but I didn't really set any expectations before going in. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it. I thought like the story was very interesting. The characters all seemed to have a lot of depth, and it made me curious to find out, like, to eager to find out what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
um so that was that's if the two episodes in, I'm already feel like I gotta keep watching. I think they did a good job um making the first season so far. I mean, unless somehow, like, the end of the season the show starts to suck, which I doubt will happen. I think this season is going to be pretty great, and I'll be looking forward to what happens next, like in the future seasons. Yeah, so overall I like it a lot.
Yeah, I will say I also went into it with like not I wasn't like feeling too strongly one way or the other about it. Like I honestly didn't know, like I wasn't overly excited about it or particularly excited about it even. I was just like kind of curious. That's how I went into it. And I really loved like or got into Game of Thrones, the show, obviously, like everyone did, but I was, less enthused about Game of Thrones in that final season or final couple of seasons. And so when I saw like the promotion for it, I was like, okay, it's kind of interesting, but I think I like, I had lost that feeling of what I felt when I was watching Game of Thrones in the earlier seasons of it. Like I totally forgot what it felt like to watch the show at the beginning. And so when I started watching this show, The House of the Dragon, um I it gave me that feeling again, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what it felt like to watch Game of Thrones." Like this feels you feel like you're in the world. It does they nailed it in the sense that it's a prequel that like firmly places you back in that same world of Westeros, and you get that same vibe from it. It gives you that same sense of mystery and allure and political intrigue and all of that. So they did a really good job. They're doing a really good job of that. And I think that they did a good job with the casting, and the writing is really good for the most part. So they're doing so far so good for me, and that even includes episodes beyond just the first two. So I definitely think, Chi, you should keep watching.
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of shows out right now, so it's like hard to keep up with everything. But yeah, I had a similar experience when I first started watching it. I was like not even sure if I was going to really get into it or really that interested in it, but then it like totally pulled me in. I became more interested than I thought I was going to be, and it reminded me of what game the magic of Game of Thrones before it that like kind of disappointing ending that we had. Or, I don't know. Some people, I guess most people were disappointed with the ending. So I'm not like saying
Hmm.
something
You're
crazy
not.
by saying
Hmm.
that. But I did want to ask Chi, since they're fresh on your mind, can you give a little bit of a recap of what exactly happens in those first two episodes? Because I want to make sure
Oh.
our conversation, I don't like say something that
Oh,
happens
you don't
in
like
the
jump ahead?
yeah.
Sure, yeah. So the first episode was pretty much just set the stage.
Yeah.
There was a Viserys Targaryen was the king,
Mhm.
and he has a brother that's kind of like hot-headed and sort of violent and seemingly like ambitious for the throne. But we don't know if he's really serious about that or he just want to be taken seriously or something. But he's like, there's was some sort of quarrel between the two brothers. So there was like a rift there. And then the queen was expecting a child, which the king
Oh,
believed to
yeah,
be a
yeah.
son.
Mhm.
And but what happened was, the queen was having a really difficult childbirth, so they performed like a ancient C-section. It's just without all the without
Yeah.
saving the mother part. But the tragedy was that they got the child out, which was a son, like the king, uh, in, was somehow convinced to be. But then the young prince died like moments later.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah,
sad. You
very
feel
sad.
so bad for them, like, for everyone involved, but, like,
It was
I feel bad for the
unfortunate.
king too, because he had to make, like, an impossible decision, and then he makes the decision, although it's, like, the only decision he really could make, it seems, at the same time, but then the
Yeah, I
son
guess
doesn't even survive.
you're talking about oh yeah, yeah, right, yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah,
That
when
was that
the
was very difficult. That was very difficult. That scene was
yeah.
great. That scene was like the king. Um, yeah, like you can really tell he was like really torn. Because he so desperately needed an heir, like a male heir. Because okay, so by the point, there has always been kings. No woman has ever sit on the throne. So in the mindset has at that moment was that he's got to have a son. Or otherwise it's gonna be a lot of trouble.
Well, he
um
also had the vision, like, he has didn't doesn't it set it up where it's like
yeah,
he
yeah, yeah,
says that he has had this vision of his son. Like, he had this very clear vision that he thought was a premonition of the future. And so he believes that he is meant to have this male heir as well. And um he thinks that this boy or this baby is
yeah.
that heir.
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. And that's
Mhm.
why he decided to sacrifice, his queen.
But, like,
Um,
so they set it up where it was, like, the maester, is that what they're called? The maester,
mhm.
like, says, like, "If you want to try to save the baby, we can." It was almost like it's either they both die for sure, or we perform this operation to try to save the baby that will definitely kill the mother. But it was
Yeah.
almost like they're gonna die. The his wife was gonna die either way, and it was a matter of, do I put her through the extra pain of trying to save this child or not? And he decides to go to try to save the child, but it doesn't work. The baby still
Yeah, I
dies.
think what the maester said was like, we can maybe save the child, or you risk losing them both. I think
Yeah.
that was what was said. And yeah, I guess, you what
Difficult.
I think that just tells us how desperate the king was, and how, I mean, how much he really wanted to have this um this son of his, that he has a vision about. um but it was all like in vain, because it wasn't the son that he that his vision told him,
Yeah.
because the child died soon after.
Yeah.
So the king was like, like devastated. And so we went to the second episode, where, you know there was some tension between Damon, the king's brother, who
Mhm.
he sent away because he did some violent things when he was like the captain of the King's Watch. So the king was not happy about that. So he was sent away back to his castle. Um, and then the king now has to like remarry very quickly, because that's a part of his duty.
Mhm.
And oh, and also, like, before all that, the king decided to name his daughter as his heir,
Yes.
which was like unprecedented, and everybody
Yeah.
was like in doubt.
Yeah.
And you can just see like everybody who has a sort of who was like vying for the throne, one way or another. They were just trying to like, they start calculating, they started doing their things for their own benefit. And but eventually, like, the king had to remarry. So, and when by the end, when episode 2 ended, the king announced that he was gonna marry his hand's daughter, the high tower's daughter, which was like a
Alicent.
shock. Allison, because by up until that point, everybody was telling the king that he should marry a daughter of his navy captain, like, which was like, it makes all kinds of sense to like solidify his power and to like unite the two powerful houses in the Westeros. And the king, like, up until that point, you would think that he would listen to that, to the advice. Like, he's like reasonable enough that he would just go that route. But then he decided to announce that he's gonna marry Alicent Hightower. And of course that angered Corlys, his navy captain. So
Well,
there
and
was this like
they're not just
potential.
it's not just the Navy captain. They're like Valyrian or something. Like they are also of the same like bloodline, the ancient like bloodline of both the Targaryens
Yeah,
and the other people are like, what are they called? Valyrian? What's their like name? The Navy
I think it's
captain that you're
Valyrian.
talking to. Valyrian?
Hold on, Corlys. Yeah, Valerian.
Yeah. So that's like a very ancient, like powerful house. And like the Targaryens have the Valyrian blood in them too, I think. I believe. That's why they
Mm-hmm.
all have like the white hair.
Yep.
Um oh, sorry if you hear my dog in the background. She's scratching in her bed. Um um and they're very wealthy too. It says Corlys is the wealthiest man in Westeros. But if they were to get married, it would be politically like a very powerful thing to do. But the person that the only viable like wife, I guess, um for Viserys, what's his name? I get all the names mixed up.
Viserys.
Viserys
Yeah.
is like this 10-year-old girl who he obviously is completely, you know, not enthused about the
Yeah.
thought of marrying this much, much younger girl who is not even of age yet to be able to be like consummate the marriage or whatever. And so it was like just disgusting. And you could see on the look of Viserys's face, like he was just completely repelled by that idea. He was trying to be sympathetic, I think, but because it's just the world that they live in where they have to marry sometimes for these political alliances. But he ends up deciding to go with Alicent Hightower, who was very strategically placed
Mm-hmm.
beside the king by Otto Hightower, who told her to go into his chambers and give him like company in the aftermath of his grief from losing his wife and baby son. So Alicent had been there like over these over this time, like just providing company to him, like comfort and someone to talk to. And she had lost her mother, so like they were like bonding over this. And but Otto definitely like strategically placed her there
Mm-hmm.
in the hope
Yeah.
that he
Yeah.
would make that decision.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Because Otto was, he definitely has his plan. Um. So yeah. So I think uh I like all the setup because I think how they set things in motion. You can just tell right now, only 2 episodes in, that a lot of things is going to happen because of all these like decisions and things that happen.
Mhm.
Um, and well, where I'm at, nothing major has happened yet, but I can just tell that there's going to be something. Um,
Oh yeah.
and because the last time we see somebody uh that made a bad decision about who they marry, what happened? The red wedding happened. So I don't know if eventually I kind of know already that no, like the king, there's gonna be a time jump, right? So it's
Mhm.
not that like the Corlys would just like he didn't do what like the phrase do, like they didn't just like he didn't just had some plan to murder the king or something. None of that happened, but you can tell that that was a quote unquote like bad decision. I just don't know what
Mhm.
the repercussion of that might be in the future. That is.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I think you're starting to see the different contenders for the throne already in these first 2 episodes. You have Damon, who is, kind of the wild card, but also like definitely seems interested by the throne. You have Otto Hightower placing his daughter almost like very, I mean, he's acting in a sense in their best interest as a family to align themselves with the throne, but like it is kind of crazy how he like pimps out his daughter to the king. It's
Yeah,
kind of wild.
exactly. I mean, now that his
But
daughter was like that much older than the daughter
I
of the
know
Valerian house, like they were just. I mean, she was supposed to be
she
what, like
was
15 or something, like
yeah,
really really
she's
young.
I
And
know,
I
which
I couldn't tell. Well, I wonder because like the king, I think the king felt, if not love, then at least some kinship, about like some sort of kinship with Alison Hightower. I can't tell if Alison Hightower feels the same, if her feelings or her sympathy towards the king was genuine or not.
I
Because I
know.
think she was at some scenes. I think she appears to be genuinely caring for the king when they
Mhm.
were like alone together. I
Mhm.
I think at least the acting convinced me
Mhm.
that that was genuine.
Mhm.
But then when she was interacting with her father, she seems reluctant whenever her father told her to go in to visit the king. She seems like at least like not very happy about having to do that. So I
Mhm.
couldn't tell if she was
Yep.
like she actually had feeling for the king. She just doesn't want this to be um some sort of political strategy or planning, or she was just you know she knows that she is a pawn and there's no escaping it, so she just went along and she was just putting on this really good act when she was with the king. I couldn't tell which one was true.
I think
So
my personal thoughts on that, and I do think it's very interesting. Like, I think you're making a really good point, Chi, that like it can be, there's a lot of things in this show, and I think this is something Game of Thrones does very, very well in general. Like, even the original show at the beginning, it like does this really good job of presenting situations where there are like multiple interpretations of it, and it could go in any number of directions. It could be this or it could be that. It could be that she does love him, it could be that she despises him and she's just putting on a really good act. But my feeling on this particular situation is, I think, I mean, so they also set it up in these first two episodes where it's very clear, like Alicent and Rhaenyra, the daughter of the king, are like best friends. Like they grew up together, they're really good friends. So Alicent's relationship with the king up until this point has been, he is the father of her best friend. So you can imagine, if you were a teenage girl, how weird that would be at first,
yeah.
or how scary that would be at first, to be asked to go and have these private conversations with the father of your best friend. Like, I don't think she had viewed him up until that point at all as like someone, like a love interest necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't think so, but maybe being the king, it's like maybe she kind of like wondered in her youth, like, oh, what would it be like to be the queen? But like, I think it's mostly like she wasn't really looking at him that way. All of a sudden, her dad is asking her to go and do this thing that is kind of scary to do, because she doesn't know how that's going to go, or if the king will even accept her presence. Like, I think she goes in, she starts to talk with the king, and she starts to get to know him. I think in getting to know him, she does start to develop some genuine feelings towards him, in the sense that she does start to care for him. Um, but I think, obviously, like having that premarital relationship is going to be different than once they are actually married, and they have that marital relationship. So I do think she developed some genuine, my interpretation was she developed some genuine feelings for him, or at least maybe that's how I was relating to it as an audience viewer of the show. Is like, at first I myself wasn't so sure about the king either, but as you're watching him and you're watching his pain and his struggle, you kind of start to feel for the guy. Like, I was like, oh, like I do feel bad. I do feel bad for him.
Mhm.
He had to make an impossible decision. He seemed like he really did love his wife, and things just don't work out for him. He was trying to do right by his daughter, but his daughter is also like not, like, she's a little bit resentful or resistant or dealing with her own grief in a sense. So he has like a strained relationship to his daughter to some extent, because Rhaenyra believes that the king never really saw her as his heir, and was basically true up until he names her heir, um, which only happened because the baby died. That maybe wouldn't have happened if that baby boy had survived. But anyways, it's like a very complicated thing. But I started to feel for the king as an audience member. So I believe that Allison also started to develop some genuine caring feelings for the king. And she also probably started to see how this would be, you know, a very good marriage for her, obviously, like the best she could possibly hope for, in a sense. But maybe that is like a partially a political thing, of course, like, and so obviously there's going to be some mixed emotions there for her, where it's like, yes, if it was a world in which the politics didn't matter at all for these people, Allison probably wouldn't have chosen to marry a man who is like twice or three times her age, like she would have chosen someone closer in age to her. But that's not the world she lives in. And so another thing I think Game of Thrones does a really good job about is showing how people, the characters in the story, sometimes things, it's like things happen to them, like they get thrust into certain situations and they just have to cope and deal with it, rather than, like they have to adapt to the world that they're in. Like they can't escape those, they can't escape the politics of it. And sometimes you have characters that get thrust into impossible situations, and they embrace it, they live up to it, or they crumble underneath it, and it's like kind of like in the original show, like Sansa had all these dreams at the beginning of being you know, the princess and the queen, and like she wanted to marry the prince. Well, look how that turned out for her, like horribly. And then she went on this whole journey, this whole arc where she was put in some very, very difficult situations, but she learned how to um find her strength in the midst of that, even when things did not work out at all the way she had hoped or planned. So I think it's Alicent in some ways reminds me of a little bit of Sansa's character to some extent, because she does represent, her and Rhaenyra represent like kind of a little bit of contrast to each other, because Alicent does represent the more like feminine, traditional, I guess, female character, whereas Rhaenyra represents more of the, like, she's less interested in marriage and more interested in like riding her dragons and like fighting or being the heir. Like she wants to be the heir and she wants to be viewed as legitimate in that way. And so she's like a little bit more of the tomboyish character. It's kind of like I mean, roughly like the Arya and Sansa contrast in the original. And I have heard people say, I have not read any of the Game of Thrones books or the book that this show is based on, but I have heard people say that George R.R. Martin likes to have mirrored characters in there are characters in this history, in this prequel, that are mirrors of the characters that come later on. So there are things that are mirrored across the ages in his stories. So do not be surprised if in this show we see some characters that remind us of characters that come later in the timeline, but that we saw before in the other Game of Thrones show, or even events. Like you brought up, Chi, like the fact that like a marriage is a marriage that is about to happen is somewhat reminiscent of what happened the last time we saw people get married in Game of Thrones, and weddings never seem to go very well in Westeros, and the red wedding, comes to mind. Now, you'll just have to keep watching to see, I guess, what comes to being, because this show does do another interesting thing, which is it does do these time jumps in between pretty much every episode, and they do it really well. I think the writers did a good job of writing those time jumps where the audience can pick up on certain context clues that help us realize how much time has passed without the show having to tell us outright like 5 years have passed, or whatever. So you'll have to keep watching for that, but it is not, you're not wrong to point out that like there are things in this show that are going to be reminiscent of things that we saw in the Game of Thrones original series. And that was apparently true in the writings of George R. R. Martin as well, which I haven't read, so I can't really speak to that, but I've heard that. So I believe it. Yeah, there's like history repeats itself to some degree, but it's like slightly different each time too. So it's still interesting. But yeah, I think Alicent does develop some genuine feelings for the king, but she's also not like wholly devoted to him in the sense like that she's completely selfless towards him. Like I think she still has her own wants and desires, and that sometimes might conflict with his. So
Yeah, I
another
mean
thing
that's
you'll have to keep
that's one of the
watching.
things I'm curious to find out, because she's
Yeah.
like so young. So I think it probably doesn't matter that much. I mean, not that she is like has her eyes on somebody else really, but I wonder if give her like 5-10 more years when she was like like a proper young woman. I do wonder how their relationship might change.
Yeah, as she
If something is gonna,
matures.
I think if I wonder if something is gonna happen. If she's say like meet somebody else that she's really attracted to, and then what would her do? Like I think it's very, um, things like this happen like a lot in Game of Thrones, right? And so I just expect, because it's in the same world, like the rules are pretty much the same, right? Like you don't, it's not a wise thing often to follow your heart. You got to do what's the most politically smart or correct thing to do. That's the way to go. I think
And
that is
yet,
it's not like the moral, but like that's just how I think that if the Game of Thrones is any indication, then that is the lesson that we learn for the character, is that you just don't do, you know you just don't, you just gotta calculate, because any seemingly like trivial decisions that are like wrong might have really severe consequences, the red wedding being one of them. And yeah, I just so yeah, I don't know, I'm curious to see how things all pan out eventually.
and yet the king made his decision more based off of his heart than what was politically the smartest thing to do.
Yes,
So,
yes, yeah. So that's one of the things I'm like looking forward to find out is um what's going to happen.
but the
Are there going
king
to be any
did,
consequences from that decision?
but I think, again, I don't know all the details from the stories and stuff, but the king did, his first wife, the one that died, I imagine that was a political marriage. Like I think he married her probably based off that being the most politically smart thing to do, and then he actually ended up falling in love with her. So it's kind of like he already did his duty by marrying that person, but he did develop genuine love for her, which is what happens or
Hmm.
seems to happen sometimes with some arranged marriages and things like that. Sometimes that people do find genuine like love for each other in those types of unions, and that's another thing I love about like Game of Thrones is some of it is very as much as it is totally a fictional like fantasy story, there are some, they do a good job of weaving in real things that were true in medieval times or in the Middle Ages or in history even, or in our current modern day world. Like there are truths that are weaved in there as well. So I do enjoy seeing those. I especially enjoy seeing like the medieval things that are accurate in these shows. Because I don't know what it is about like medieval times that is so fascinating to us, but there is something about it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
anyways, I do like seeing that stuff where it's like that is really like what it was like to some degree. And like, you know, I don't know. And the fact that like Alicent is 14 or 15 when she gets married to the king, again, that is what happened in history. Like girls
Oh
would get
yeah.
married at that age. And to think about that, like in modern day context, it's like really hard to imagine that. But at the same time, like, gosh, it's just crazy to think about how different your life would have been if you were
Yeah.
alive at that
Because the
time, you know?
lifespan at the time was like not a lot of people would live beyond past 40 even. So you got to start early.
Well, and
And
childbirth was extremely dangerous,
oh yeah.
and you actually even today giving birth in your 20s typically is safer than giving birth as you get older. I mean, I think
Hmm.
30s is fine too, but like as you get into your later 30s, there are more and more risks of complications. And today we have modern medicine that can like help us manage those things, and like we give birth in hospitals and stuff. But back in those times, there was none of that stuff. So, like, if you wanted to have children, you did need to start kind of early because first of all, you might die in childbirth. So, you might only have a few shots at it. And so, you want to maximize like your youthful like energy that you have in order to do that. And and if you are giving birth, if you're having kids in your teens, late teens or early 20s, like you might be able to continue having kids for like 10 years. And sometimes that is what people had to do. They had to have a lot of kids because that's how they survived. Like they needed kids to like help out and like help carry on the family's like legacy and all this stuff. And they needed their older kids to help care for the younger ones. Like it was a whole system like these family units had. But like I guess when it comes to royalty, it was about like producing heirs and things like that in order to continue their family's legacy. And I don't know. So it is like that is accurate. Like women were married at younger ages and started having kids at younger ages. And yeah, so
Yeah,
it
there was
just
a
is what
scene
it is.
when the Valerian, the daughter from Valerian, the Lenny's, I think her name was like Lenny's Valerian, like the the little
Little
kid,
girl.
yeah, little girl,
Yeah.
and there was this scene where the king and the girl was just walking down this path in the garden or something, because the king was considering marrying her, right? And it was, everybody thought that's gonna happen. So there was this scene where when the king asked the girl, like, okay, so what did your mother tell you? And the girl said, like, she told me that I don't have to bed you until I turn until I'm
14
14.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I think that was when, I think that was the scene that tells us like how,
Messed
it's just
up that is.
how
Yeah.
horrifying this marriage is to the, like, from the king's point of view,
Yeah.
or even from the girl's point of view. It's like, wow, like, yeah.
Well,
She
and
has to, like, 14 is a really young age to be like, to yeah, to like to be, to start being sexually active, and the girl was not even that age yet. and
and
and there and
the
there they were. Yeah, it's crazy.
it's also in a sense like kind of horrifying from the mother's perspective too, because she says,
Mm,
because the king asks the girl, what did your mother tell you? because
Mm-hmm.
he's related to the mother. The mother is his
Sister.
sister. And she was also like once upon a time had been a contender for the throne, but that was back in the day, and they named Viserys the king because of the patriarchy that exists in the Targaryen family or house, the Targaryen house. So she was passed over for the crown. So it went to the next male, but she's still interested in it too. But I thought it was interesting when the king asked the little girl specifically, like, what did your mother tell you? And then that's when she says, that I don't have to bed you until I'm 14 or whatever. Cause the mother's
Mm-hmm.
like probably conflicted about it also, where it's like, this sucks that I'm having to try to marry my daughter off at this young age. But like the one consolation is that she wouldn't actually have to like become sexually active until she's a little bit older. But she's still
Yeah.
getting, it still is horrifying, but then also that's what the mother has to allow in order for that, this chance at their line being continued uh onto the throne as well. But all of it is like, it is twisted in a sense, but that is somewhat the reality of what
Yeah.
happened at
Yeah. I mean
times
that's
in
the game.
past.
That's the game you play in that world. Like that is what
Yeah.
you do. You
Yeah.
know, if you have any sort of ambition for the throne, then that's what you do.
Yeah.
And as horrifying as it is, there's just, people just they just do the most politically correct thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there was another scene later on, like immediately later on, where the king's daughter was having a conversation with the uh her aunt, basically, like the king's mother,
Yeah.
the mother of the little girl that was to
Mhm.
be married to the king.
Yep.
And I mean the mother was being very candid. It's like, yeah, this bothered me very much, but that is the order of things. That is what you do.
Yeah.
And I think, um well, thank God this happened. Like, maybe once upon a time this was all true. Like, this is this was what's happening in the real world. But I guess nowadays, I thankfully we're watching this fantasy story. Otherwise, oh man, it's just so crazy. Um
Yeah. I think it is interesting. Like, I do want to point out about that conversation between Rhaenyra and the king's sister, the mother of the girl. They're like up on this balcony
mhm.
overlooking the king walking down below with the
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah.
But they have this interesting conversation, which I think is interesting because what is the name um of the woman, the king's sister?
Yeah. Hold on. Oh, Rhaenys.
Rhaenys.
Rhaenys. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Rhaenys. Rhaenys is saying to Rhaenyra, basically, she's saying that you, like the king, well, correct me if I get this wrong, Chi, but from what I remember, she's saying even though the king like named you heir, that doesn't mean that the realm is going to accept you. And or like she's basically saying like Rhaenys is she's like kind of bitter about the fact that she was passed over for the throne, and she has this understanding of like, oh, it's like more of a patriarchy and they will never accept like a woman on the throne or whatever.
Mhm.
And she's
Yeah.
trying to communicate that to Rhaenyra, and then Rhaenyra says this thing of like, well, maybe you think that, but maybe it was just you. Pretty much, she's like
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
saying
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. They have this
you
like
are saying that,
yeah.
but maybe it was just you that they didn't like. It wasn't the fact that you were a
Mhm.
woman. And I was like,
Mhm.
that was a really good conversation in the sense of like, it was really good because it is like that. Those are real. I think that really happens with, I would say women, but I think it's with men too. It's like, it's not just, it's like with everybody. Sometimes people think like, oh, that's just the way things are, where that's how it's always going to be or whatever. And so they try to, if they try and fail to break that mold, then they assume like, oh, well, that's just the way it is, like we can't escape it. Just like this Rhaenys is assuming like, oh, I do have to marry my daughter off in this way at this young age because that is just the way things are. But then Rhaenyra, who's like the young, youthful, like, new person on the scene, she has this like kind of very confident, but also kind of, I don't know, um, what's the word?
Naivete.
Naivete, but also like a little bit of not selfishness, but like just like um I've just, the word has that I'm looking for has just lost me, but I think she thinks like, yeah, like, well, I can do it. You couldn't do it, but I can do it, like I
Mhm.
will be able to do what you could not. And it's like, maybe that's true, but it's like kind of a flaw on both of their sides. But you also wonder if Rhaenys, you kind of wonder if she really believes what she's saying, or if she's just saying that to try to put doubt into Rhaenyra, because
Mhm.
she is now advocating, she wants her heir to be on the throne, not Rhaenyra. She wants this marriage
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah. So
happen,
it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't
you
make
know.
sense to her to like to cultivate confidence in the Rhaenyra. Yeah.
Yes.
But I do think my interpretation was that I do think she was being sincere despite being a little
I don't
bitter.
know.
I think was being sincere because she said at the end. So okay, so she basically made the same point that, the first time, and then Rhaenyra said maybe they just rejected you, not not women
Yeah.
as a whole. It's just you
Yeah.
they rejected,
Yeah.
right? And then I think this is when Rhaenys think that, oh yeah, of course you are such a young girl, you haven't seen the world. Of course you would think that. So she said, well, you will see, like the world would rather, like people would rather see the world burn
Yeah. Okay.
than to see a woman on the throne. And I do think she was not. I think maybe she's doing both, but I don't think the feeling that I have was that she's not just saying that to put like to mess with Rhaenyra's head. I do think she, because like, it's been what however many years, and has not been a woman, not a single female that has sit on the throne. So I think she was sort of like, well, you'll learn, you'll see what I mean. Um, you know, um, yeah. So I think she
Yeah.
was being sincere there,
Well, and I think maybe
in her sentiment.
I think in some sense I got the sense that Rhaenys is interested in undermining Rhaenyra.
Hmm.
And Rhaenyra, I think the word that I was actually trying to search for earlier was like Rhaenyra's being a bit like narcissistic about it, where she's like, yeah, a little self-centered in the sense of she's assuming that everything's going to work in her favor here. But and maybe in some sense Rhaenys is trying to warn Rhaenyra of that, but I got more of the sense that she's kind of, Rhaenys is wanting to undermine Rhaenyra and put some, maybe she's speaking some truths, but with the interest of putting some doubt in Rhaenyra's head or something. I don't know. But I don't know if that would actually, if that's actually the case. But I just I think that it was a really interesting conversation because I think that this happens between, like, when people are vying for power, you know, when that power has evaded one person, that person can get a little bitter or resentful or jealous of the next person that comes along that seems to be able to secure that power. But then at the same time, that person that like easily secures that power doesn't have the greatest sense of how fragile that is, that they could easily lose that power. And the person, it was a really good like setup conversation, I thought. And I think I also got one other thing I wanted to say about that is I also got the sense that like Rhaenys is, she's come to terms with the fact to some degree that she was passed over. And so she's saying these things to Rhaenyra, like, you know, a woman will never, like, they will never accept a woman on the throne or whatever she says. But I think what she's come to realize is like there are other ways that women influence or have power in this world. And so she's like, Rhaenys is realizing that there might be another way, whereas, or she has this mindset now of like, oh, well, I couldn't get the throne, so I have to find another way. Whereas Rhaenyra is still of the mindset of, I want to outright like be on the throne. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, I
so
do.
it's like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, like, there are, I think it was kind of hinted at in that conversation that, like, even though women weren't in this patriarchal Targaryen, like, society or whatever, women weren't on the throne, there were other ways that they were leveraging their own power in this world, and we're about to see what some of those ways are. And that maybe Rhaenyra does have that more naive view. She's not seeing that that women have alternative pathways to power as well. But I don't know if Rhaenyra would even be interested in that. So it's like
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
these things.
Yeah.
But
I think that was a contrast. Well, we don't know how Rennie's was when she was young, but I do agree with you that I think, when we see her in the show at her age, she pretty much thinks that the only way the woman can, like, exert power is by sort of allowing themselves to be some sort of subsidiary to men, right? Like, you can never have like power yourself. You just have to sort of, you know by
except
being the
her,
queen, or by being the mother of the queen. That is how that is our game, right?
yeah,
but
like
but but in a
we're
way,
playing a slightly
right,
different
right,
game than the
right.
men
But
are.
the
Yeah.
thing is, though, I think the show was trying to say that, but that is still inferior, right? Like, even though, yeah, you can have all your influences but you are still being somebody's property, right? Like, you can never sit on the throne. You can never be the queen. You have to be, the best you can be is to be the wife of the king. I mean, by being that kind of queen, or by being the mother of the heir, or something like that. Um,
But I don't know, because
but
I
but
think
but
that's one of the
Rhaenyra,
things this
yeah,
show is going to be exploring, is like that there's more than one way to the throne in a sense. And yes, where, at the end of the day, I suppose like the most powerful position would be to be the person who actually sits on the throne, which up until this point in this particular story, it was only men. Um, there are they're laying out some alternative pathways, where alternatives to being directly like named heir, like just because Rhaenyra is named heir doesn't mean that she's a shoe-in, basically, is what the story is
Mm-hmm.
starting to set up, is that there are some other ways, and some women have in the story are learning these alternative paths than what Rhaenyra is doing. And Rhaenyra is trying to do something really significant as well through the pathway she's taking, but like there are these other like kind of back ways into the throne too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
That's
that's what
true.
it's
That's
trying
true.
to
Yeah,
say. And it's kind
yeah.
of like a contrast. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Like it is setting up this contrast between Rhaenyra and Alicent and how their approaches. Alicent wasn't even didn't even it was really her father's ambition, not her own, that places her in that position. But she is the more like she is taking a different route than Rhaenyra is in life in general, and that
Mm-hmm.
contrast like continues to play out, and it's pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that was really obvious that what they sort of put these two women side by side, and they have really different sort of opposite characters, and they were put in the game, um and because of that, like they were put into the game in different ways. I do hope though, I do hope this whole story is about how the House of Targaryen got their first like woman king. I didn't read the book, so I don't know what happens really, but I hope that's what happens.
I have no idea, but
Yeah.
I do know, like, I think that I don't know. I don't know, and I don't wanna look up too much because I don't
Hmm.
want to be spoiled, but I also, I have heard that this show is already deviating somewhat from what the book that this show is based on says, because apparently the book that this show is based on was the way George R. Martin wrote it was that there were three different narrators that they're telling the history. And it is a history, it's not really a story. It's kind of like the Silmarillion to Lord of the Rings,
Mm.
like this is what this is. But the people that wrote down the history, the characters that wrote down the history are all there's three different narrators and they're all unreliable narrators. So
Mm.
they're telling biased accounts of what goes on. So apparently, from what I've heard, what this show is trying to do is, which I think George R. R. Martin has been very involved in this show. So I
Hmm.
think he is having a say over how things go. But um the show is kind of meshing the three different accounts together and supposedly in an attempt to kind of tell the truth of what actually happened rather than these biased accounts of how George R. R. Martin like wrote it down. Um and so supposedly this is like the middle of the three accounts and it's kind of like the most truthful version of what actually went down. But who knows? I don't know. I don't know if there was a queen before Daenerys, comes along, or someone vying to be the queen. Well, I mean, there's obviously someone vying for that in the show,
Hmm.
Rhaenyra.
But none has done it. And none has actually done it
Has
yet.
any Targaryen woman sat on the Iron Throne? That's the question. Or
Yeah. I
yeah,
feel like the
and
knowledge should be out there. Like, it even even if the story is not, well, I don't know if it's true, but like if the story is still like the books are still ongoing, I feel like the knowledge, we can find the answer to this question somewhere in the Game of Thrones. Like whether Daenerys Targaryen was the first woman to sit on the Iron Throne ever. I feel like that should have been said somewhere already, but I can remember.
um yeah, it probably is, but that's what I'm like, I don't know if I want total
Yeah, me either.
spoilers.
Yeah, I don't want to like look up, but I just feel like that answer, that is probably not like a mystery.
Mhm.
Um, it's
Yeah.
probably like set already.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm just curious to see. But I mean, either way, like I'm not gonna be upset if the if Rhaenyra ends up not sitting on the throne, like, I'm not gonna be upset, but I'm mainly just curious about how the whole thing is gonna go down at the end.
Yeah. I mean, a lot happens in the next few episodes too. So you have to give it some time for these characters to further develop as well, because you know, I don't know. It's like hard to. This is a Game of Thrones also does a good job of this. I feel like, or George R. R. Martin does, is like it's hard sometimes to pick a favorite character because they're constantly changing. So it's like some characters will like grow on you, and then other ones that you thought you liked, you actually don't like so much. It's like they change over time. So who
Hmm.
you're rooting for might change depending on, what happens. And so it's like, yeah, it's very interesting, but they do a good job and of that in this show as well, which I really enjoy, because I think this show is definitely doing a lot of the things that Game of Thrones does really well. And
Hmm.
so that's good. I just fingers crossed that it continues to be good and that they also know how to conclude the show without it being a major disappointment. So I
Yeah, I don't
always
know
feel
how they.
like
I don't know how they messed that up. Because I don't know. I don't know.
I always feel
Yeah,
like you can't really judge a story until you've heard the ending. And it's unfortunate because sometimes the story
it
could be
is.
pretty dang good until the end. And if the end sucks, then your overall view of the whole story kind of sucks.
Yep.
And because it's like that's where it was all heading in the first place. But I think I'm definitely like intrigued by this show, and I have hope that it will have a more satisfying end to it. But we have a ways to go before we get there, and so far so good. I also want to say, like, I really love the different actors that they cast in this show. Like, I really have enjoyed
Hmm.
each and every one of them. Um, I was telling Chi last week, like off air, or maybe I said it while we were
Can't remember.
recording, but I
It's
just
really
think
not. Yeah.
Patty Constantine, however you say
Considine.
his name, he is amazing. Like when I first saw him playing the king on this show, I was like, I don't know how I feel about him, but then over the episodes, like he grows on me quite a bit.
Hmm.
Matt Smith playing Damon is perfect casting, in my opinion. Not that I knew of this character before, but he just does such an excellent job playing this like kind of nefarious troublemaker character. And I really enjoyed that. I really, both of the young women that play Rhaenyra and Alicent, like at first I wasn't so sure about them, but they grow on you quite a bit. And now I'm like scared to watch the next episode that just came out yesterday, because it's going to be older actresses playing those roles, and I like the younger ones. Like they grew on me. Like
Hmm.
I kind of want them to be the same actresses. But whatever. We'll see how it goes. It might be fine, but that's pretty good. And then the woman who plays Rhaenys, I think she's really interesting to
Hmm.
watch on screen. And I'm interested to see more of Coralise. I think he's going to be a major player that we haven't seen. You don't see too much of him in the first two episodes, but I feel like he's going to play a big role. And then who else? Uh
The hand.
Otto
Yeah.
Hightower. I think he's intriguing as well. Um yeah, the hand of the king. So I don't know. There's a lot going on. Oh, and in these first two episodes, so Rhaenyra was named heir. Did the king give her the task to do? Because she was kind of getting she was kind of still, even after she was named heir, she was like
Hmm.
invited to the council meetings.
small council or something, but she was just like here pouring drinks.
Yeah.
She was just being like a I guess a regular
Maid.
like a royal daughter or something. She was not take well, she felt like she was not being taken seriously. She was not given she she wasn't being given um enough responsibilities.
So did the
Um
king give her the task to do where after she complains of that and he's like, "Well, here, do this task." Or I don't know if she complained about it, but he was like, "Go name this. I need you to find this knight." Did she do that? No.
you mean like find the captain for the city watch? For the king's watch?
Um
Is that what you're saying? What
yeah,
you're
or
referring
like
to?
the she's supposed to review the knights and choose the one that she wants to be like her protector or whatever.
I thought she was
I
picking the
maybe
captain
that
for the
happens.
king's watch
I think that happens at the very
later.
beginning of the next episode because you
Oh,
would know
okay,
what I'm
okay.
talking about.
Right.
I think it's
Yeah,
the very start.
so far she's done. So she well, so there was this incident where like Damon stole like the dragon egg that the king put in the
Oh
cradle of the dead
yeah.
prince. So
Yeah.
he took that away because, as he was just being like a like, oh, I have the right to do that, like blah, 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 blah. And
Mhm.
then so the king's hand Otto went there and tried to like sort of talk him down, and then it looks like there was going to be like some serious fight and bloodshed, and then Rhaenyra just like showed up with a dragon and then retrieved the egg and nobody was hurt. um
Yeah, she knows how to
and
communicate with Damon. Like
yeah,
he
yeah,
really likes her. Like she and him get along and
yeah.
they I think have a fondness for each other and they have respect for each other because they're both like they're both dragon riders or whatever and they have
Hmm.
that dragon in them or whatever. And so I think
Yeah.
she's able to communicate with him in a way that others are not.
Yeah, they have like special bond between them. And so
Yeah.
the king was like displeased by the fact that, well, she didn't tell him she's going to do that. But then she also did a really good job, like, de-escalating the whole conflict and retrieving the egg. So he was kind of proud of her for doing that as well. And so the next task she was to pick out the captain, the knight that replaces that's gonna take the position that Damon left because Damon was sent home, right? And so she picked. Well, she was like saying again, like there was all this like, oh, the the politically correct thing, the politically correct choice, because which house is more powerful
Oh
and
yeah.
whatnot. So she
Yeah.
picked the one that's like a common born, like but apparently like, it's really uh
Kristen Cole. Okay, so
Kristen
you
Cole,
did
like,
see it. That's what I'm
yeah,
talking about. But he
well, yeah,
ends
but
up being her, like, I guess as the captain of the Night's Watch, his main job is to actually like be her protector. Like he's like
yeah, I think that's
he
part of
what
it. Like, I think that
yeah.
the job was to like protect the king, like protect the royal family, like
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
palace or whatever, or
Yeah.
like the capital.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so she did that, and then because she said, well, he
Yeah.
was the only person that has like real
Yeah.
battle experience, because the other
Yeah.
knights, they were just like some
Mhm.
some heir,
Noble
some famous
born.
houses, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
and they didn't really know,
Mhm.
like, they didn't actually
Mhm.
do any real fighting ever.
Yeah.
And then the hen was like, well, the hen was like secretly disprove her decision, because like Otto is all about politics. So you can just tell that, you can just tell from the scene like how, and that's another like telltale sign of how like each of these characters work. um so
Yeah,
yeah, so that,
Rhaenyra is more about like also like maybe in some ways similar to her father, like sometimes she's going to follow her heart or like what feels right versus what is politically the best thing to do.
mhm.
Um and then Yeah, because I think you're right, like, that her choice in making that choice was, like, a good example of kind of how she operates, like, she's not necessarily gonna play by all the rules. She's subverting some expectations and going with what she thinks is the best or what feels right to her without always, like, making the right, like, political decision or the strongest political decision.
Yeah, yeah. And I think
But
it's
yeah,
hard to yeah.
Kristen Cole was the knight that, like, won the tournament, um, from the previous episode that she,
Mhm.
like, gave him her favor or whatever, and, um, I think he's gonna continue to play a bigger role.
Yeah, I hope
Um,
so.
yeah, and I like him too because he's very attractive. So, as an actor, I mean, so
When
you
I
have
first
to
saw his
have
face,
some
I
of
thought he
those.
was somebody else. Like there was an actor that I know that looks really like him, but ends up being
Oh,
somebody else.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? Did you see like the Narnian, like the Prince Caspian one,
I
the
don't
Narnia
know if I
movie?
ever saw
Oh,
that. I think that was my
the actor
favorite.
I mistook him for is Ben Barnes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I
who's
mean, are
also
you
very
talking
attractive.
about the Chronicles of Narnia movies
Yeah,
that they did?
yeah.
I
Exactly.
saw the
Yes.
movies. Yeah, I guess there was a Prince Caspian, the character, like, showed up in those, right? That's what you're talking
Not
about?
the first one, but like there was I think the third book or something. It was all
Was the
about
Prince
the Prince
Caspian book?
Caspian. Like he was the main
Okay.
character, and they made a
Yeah.
movie out of that. And
Okay.
the actor that plays
Oh,
Prince
I
Caspian was
didn't
called Ben Barnes, and
okay.
they look a lot alike. Like
Yeah.
the actor that plays Kristen Cole
Yeah.
looked very much like Ben Barnes. I was like, "Oh, is that Ben
Yeah.
Barnes?" But no, it wasn't. It was somebody else. But
Yeah.
yes, he's a good
He
looking guy.
Kristen Cole reminds me of, like, a Lancelot character. Like, I think he's supposed to be, like, kind of like a Lancelot, like, knight in shining armor, very attractive, tall, dark, and handsome. Yeah, all of the
Yeah.
above.
Hmm.
And, yeah,
We
he
just don't
that's
know if
what
he's
he
actually good in character yet. I don't know yet. Like so far, Alina, he is like
you haven't
really
seen yeah.
like from the scene that he was in. We there was not much to tell about his character. He seems like okay, right? Like
Yeah.
he seems like to be just like you said, to be like just very just like a knight, like a typical knight in a shining
Yes.
armor. But we don't know what he's up to. We don't know, if he's common born, then he's gonna have. I would guess that he's gonna have some sort of agenda to like climb up the social ladder, but I don't know. I don't know yet. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. He's,
yeah,
he's I think Dornish or something like
he's
that.
Dornish. Yes,
Yeah.
that's why he has like
Yeah.
his darker complexion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Olive-skinned or whatever, but,
Yep.
yeah, it's interesting. The players are in place in these
Hmm.
first 2
Hmm.
episodes to
Yep.
mostly in place, and you just have to keep watching, Chi. It gets
I know.
even
I
better,
will.
I
I
have
will.
to say.
Yeah, I will. I
Um,
think this. I'm gonna. Yeah, I'll keep watching for sure
yeah.
because I'm really
Yeah.
interested.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll check in about it next time. There's, like, so many other shows out right now, like you were saying last week you're watching Cobra Kai, which I've never seen any
Oh,
of, but I
I'm
really
done.
wanna
I'm done
watch.
watching them already.
Okay,
I'm done with
okay.
Cobra Kai. I'm watching Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that's also a lot to catch up on.
I'm watching Game of Thrones and Rings of Power, which Rings of Power, I feel like Game of Thrones is getting better and better each episode, and Rings of Power is getting worse and
Oh, really? More and more bland.
worse. It's just more and more annoying as time goes on, but I think it's almost done. I don't think there's that many episodes left in this
Are they getting a
season.
second season? Do you know? Is there going to be a second season for the
Well,
Ring
I
of Power?
think that there's definitely supposed to be a second season. There's supposed to be 50 episodes total that they're doing. It was going to be like
Hmm.
5 seasons or something like that. And
Okay.
or 6th season, I don't know. And uh but I kind of hope that they do a pretty massive like revamp for the 2nd season, but the chances of that are low. I just am having a hard time understanding how they had such a ginormous budget, but it's not very good. But I think that's sometimes a lot of the problem is when things have too big of a budget, it like detracts from the quality of what ends up being made. It's like limits are actually good for creativity because then the creators are forced to get creative with what they do. And therefore everything has to matter because they do have limited resources. But when you have like a really high budget or something, it's like there's too much leeway for the creators, and then the creation itself isn't as
Yeah.
meaningful or something.
Yeah.
But I, you
I yeah,
know,
yeah,
it
I think when you have like a huge budget, I would imagine it's more easy to get lost in the more superficial stuff. Like we're gonna
yeah,
have this like really
yeah,
amazing set, really
yeah.
great CGI, whatever, and then they just put a lot of brain power into that rather
Mhm.
than like, well, what is the story? What are the characters?
Yeah.
Because these things you don't have to. It has nothing to do with the budget.
Mhm.
You just gotta have a good writing and good story, and there you go. And then it's the all these things
Exactly.
that you can that's gonna really benefit from the bigger budget should be there to serve the story and the characters. But I think when you have like a really big budget, it
Mhm.
tends to be like like the tail wags the dog, or like the car drives the horse or something like that. It's
Yes.
like it's
Exactly.
backwards. I think this show,
It's
but I haven't seen the show, but from what I heard from you and some other like talks on internet, it just seemed like at the core the story is not that great.
No, it's
Um,
horrible. And it's like that's exactly right. You're exactly right, Chi. It's like what should always happen for a quality product, especially when it comes to such a mythological story like Lord of the Rings or like the Lord of the Rings world, like Middle Earth and all that. Um Arda. Is the story should come first and then the budget will should follow the story. But first you have to have the story written well. This situation seems like what happened was they had the budget and then they tried to make the story after they already had the budget for it. So it's like the budget came first. The budget is the foundation and then the story was written after with the budget in mind. But it's like it should have been the reverse. It should have been they should have had a really good story in place and then come up with the budget for it. But in this case,
well,
they bought the
yeah.
IP and then they wanted to do something with it. It was grand. And so then they tried to write a story. And it's like, I don't know if it's almost like just the foundation is messed up. But
Mm.
it's just frustrating because it could have been, I mean, it's in some ways the greatest like fantasy world ever built. It's like the grandfather of all modern fantasy. So it should be amazing. Like it should, there's so much depth to that world that I think they could have done something really good. And then I also think there's so many people, so many artists and writers and true creatives that are so passionate about Lord of the Rings that they could have found some people to write this that were, I'm not saying that the people that did write it weren't passionate. I think that they probably were. But there could have been maybe some writers that they found that have more of a mind for how Tolkien would have written something and written it more in that style or with that essence in it, and this just wasn't done in that way. It doesn't feel like it has that essence. And it it's like there's a lot of things that happen in the show where it's like I can tell that what they want is for the audience to feel like they want me to care about this, but I just don't care about it because it wasn't like set up appropriately. Like it's like, oh, this is supposed to be a really meaningful moment that I'm like feeling emotions over, but it's just like not, because it wasn't written. It wasn't the way that the show is playing out doesn't make you care about the characters in that way. I mean, there's a couple of things in it that I am intrigued by. So I'm not like totally checked out from it. That's why I've kept watching it. But it's one of these things that is like, I've kept watching it this season, but I don't know if I'll watch next season. I might watch the first episode to see if it's different. And if it is, then maybe I will keep watching
Yeah,
it.
you'll
But
watch
if
on. If
it's
not, you
not,
just quit.
I
Yeah.
might just quit because it's honestly like not, it feels very, I said to you last time, like it feels very generic to me, like just some sort of generic fantasy. It doesn't feel like it's this elevated thing that you, when you think of like the Lord of the Rings movies or even that like animated movie that they made like before Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, there was like that animated thing. And when I was a kid, I remember going over to my neighbor's house and we watched just the beginning part of that movie. And something about it is like magical, where it was like, as a kid, like even seeing that animated movie, I was like, wow, like this is so cool. It was so mysterious, like the rings and the hobbits and Gandalf and Frodo. Like I just like remember being totally drawn into it. And I just don't think, I don't know, because I am an adult now. So I sometimes don't know if like some of this is that I'm losing, I have matured to a point where I've lost some of that childlike wonder at stuff. But I like to think that I have maintained that part of myself where I can still engage with these worlds and in a somewhat like childlike way. And I can remember what it was like reading or watching certain things as a child. But like I feel like as a child, if I had watched this Lord of the Rings show, I might have like watched it, but I don't think it would have hit me with that same level of mystery and intrigue that like watching even that animated movie that came out gave me. And I think that's just because it wasn't like the way it's written is not conducive to that. And it could have been. And that's the sad thing, is like there's so much cool stuff that happens earlier on in the timeline, in Tolkien's like timeline, that could have been very scary and intriguing and like mysterious and ancient, and all of that like magic is kind of missing. And there's some really visually cool things that you see in the show, but it's just like that extra element of like movie magic or whatever seems to be missing from it. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I could be that, not might not be the experience of everybody watching it, but I'm just like not, I'm like watching it out of entertainment, but not out of like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, I love this show. I'm definitely
Yeah.
more feeling that way about the Game of Thrones show than this one. But I did also want to say that the Andor Star Wars show is coming out.
I
They've
watched the
had,
first episode.
you did? I
I
haven't
did.
watched any of it yet, so don't spoil anything. Don't spoil
I
anything.
won't. And but also there wasn't that much to spoil just for the first episode. It's only like a half an hour long, and it would just introduce Cassian Andor to us, and that's all.
I heard
There.
that the first two episodes are kind of slow, and then the third episode, I actually heard that you can actually skip the first two episodes and just start with the third, because there's kind of like a recap.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's true because I haven't seen any of it, and I will watch it from the first episode. I know I will. But I think the point is that those first two episodes are kind of like slow. and not the
Yeah,
most
the first one
best.
was all right. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't sort of. I feel like right now, for now, like after watching the first episode, I can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that is because of this, like, the same thing happened with Marvel, is that you, after like watching so much stuff from the same sort of universe, you get this
Yeah.
fatigue.
Yeah.
So it could be that.
Yeah. I
But
know.
it certainly wasn't bad, such that I feel like, well, I don't want to watch it anymore. It's so boring. It wasn't
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I'll probably just keep. I think I'll most likely keep watching,
Mhm.
and just see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to watch them. I just haven't yet. But I will.
There's
I
so much
will.
to watch. Seriously, there's so much to watch.
So much. So
So
much.
much. It's hard to keep up.
It is. Yes. But I think that about wraps it up for the first two episodes of House of the Dragon. Unless you have any
Hmm.
other last thoughts to add on those, Chi.
I don't actually. That's pretty much it.
Okay, well, let's sign off then, I suppose. Um, yeah, I hope you keep watching it and we can talk more about it. And then um, you can also feel free to share some of your impressions of these other shows that you've watched that I haven't watched, since I just went on a spiel about Rings of Power, even though you haven't watched it yet. But so many shows, and maybe eventually we'll get talking about another movie here pretty soon. But thanks to everyone who tuned in and listened and made it this far. We really appreciate you, and please like, share, and subscribe. Um, yeah, anything else to add, Chi?
No, that's perfect. That's perfect outro. So yeah, I guess we'll see you next time, and where we talked about what are we gonna talk about. Well, I'll watch two more
I,
episodes of House of Dragon for sure. So at least
yeah,
that.
and
And if you
I've
get
been
to
wanting.
watch,
Sorry, I had told Chi, like, I've been wanting to watch The Last Duel, the movie, which he has already seen. So maybe I'll have watched that by the next time we
mhm,
talk.
yeah,
And yes, well, and maybe Andor as well. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
we'll see what
Stay
happens.
tuned.
We'll see
Stay
what
tuned.
Leah actually get to watch. Yeah, so we'll see you next time, and we'll talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Alrighty. Signing off. I'm Leah. He's Chi. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. See you guys next time.